Yeah.
I'm going to call this meeting to order and remind those that are in attendance online that these meetings are recorded for public viewing and placed on a publicly viewed website. This is the regular meeting of council, special meeting.
Yeah, whichever you
Whichever.
call it.
Okay, meeting of council held Tuesday, May 14th at 7 p.m. So if I could get someone to, oh, and we do also acknowledge that we are on the unceded First Nations land of Ihadisat Chinnikit territory. If I could get someone to move the approve of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, so that was O'Connor and Lewis. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And there was one addition to the agenda, and we'll do it immediately after a resolution for the 3 councillors online. So Janice, Lewis, and O'Connor to participate via Teams. So if we can add that, and we'll do that. I'll make that motion directly after I call the question on this. So as amended, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is carried. So I'm going to make a resolution that as per our procedural bylaw, that Councillor Janice, Lewis, and O'Connor can participate in this meeting via electronic means. I can get a second. Thank you, Councillor Jack. And that's just because of the 2 in a row participating via an electronic means that we have to do that by resolution. So we had to look back, and this is what we wound with, is all 3 having to make the resolution for all 3 of you. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, especially Councillor Janice. Appreciate that. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. All right, minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes from April 23rd, 2024 regular meeting.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor and James and Lewis. Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? Errors, omissions? Not seeing anyone. I will call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So that's carried. Delegations and petitions. Chando said votes. We have.
Debbie Martin and Lucien Maurice.
Thank you so much from Chando said votes here to make a presentation. Thank you for being here this evening. And I would hand the floor directly over to you.
Hey, yeah, thank you very much. I'm Gabby. I'm the partner at CNB here, and it's been a pleasure working with Pete and Alana. So just want to start out by saying thank you so much to them. We wouldn't have been able to get the audit done without them. And with that, I'll dive right into my presentation here, and I'll share my screen. And I'll just say before I get started, if you do have any questions, feel free to jump in throughout. I'm not offended. You don't need to wait till the end, or you can wait till the end. But if something does catch your attention, feel free to jump in.
Thank you for that.
So
and thank you for acknowledging the wonderful staff that we have, because
yes,
we like
they are wonderful
too.
They're great to work with, and like I said, we wouldn't have been able to get the audit done without them. It's an interruption on their already very busy schedules, so we know it's not ideal. All right, so I'll just start out with our audit findings report here, and can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
I think Barb can see on, so I'm sure they can see online as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So just starting out the status of the audit is complete as of today. There is nothing left in terms of audit procedures to do. All that we need is final approval of the financial statements, which I will review after our audit findings report here. A signature on our management representation letter, which has been circulated to management, and approval of our unadjusted journal entries, which are also included as an appendix to this report. Just in terms of significant audit matters, these are matters that we spend a little bit more time on during the audit and that are a primary focus during the audit. One of the big ones every year is tangible capital assets. So looking at what capital asset additions the village has, whether there's any big capital projects that we should be aware of, and ensuring that they are recorded appropriately and that nothing is missing. So this year, the village had $73,000 in capital additions. The major additions this year included the slope hazard project for around 38,000 was spent this year. This project is in progress at the end of the year, so there's quite a bit more left to do in fiscal 2024. And just based on discussions with Pete, that project is scheduled to be finished in 2024. It's primarily funded by the province of British Columbia. There was also the addition of a tsunami siren for $15,000. This was completed in November of 2023. And then the Pandora's culvert reconstruction for $10,000, which was also in progress at the end of the year. So in terms of audit work over our capital assets, we discuss what the projects were with management in the year to make sure that we capture all of them and nothing's missing. We look at third-party documentation, so things like invoices, receipts, and agreements to make sure that the amounts and the details of the capital assets match what third parties have reported. And then we also review expense accounts to make sure that no expense or no capital assets are in expense accounts when they should not be, and they should be capitalized. So we did recommend adjusting journal entries to capitalize the assets and move them out of expenses. And no significant control deficiencies were identified during these procedures. The second significant audit matter and primary focus of the audit was the asset retirement obligations. So there's a new accounting standard called asset retirement obligations under PSAS 3280. You might have heard discussion about it. It's been a fairly relevant topic in the municipal world and in the public sector world, just with the adoption of this accounting standard being having a significant impact on most municipalities and public sector entities. The reason for that is that most municipalities and public sector entities are having to recognize an asset retirement obligation where they otherwise didn't have to. So what is an asset retirement obligation? It's any situation where the village has a legal obligation with respect to a capital asset and having to, at some point in the future, remediate it or retire it in a specified way by law. So one of the most common ones that is applicable to many entities is the existence of asbestos within buildings. So by law, there's a specific way that you have to deal with asbestos within buildings. So right there's an asset retirement obligation and a cost associated with having to remediate asbestos that exists in a building that's already owned. So when we're recognizing the asset retirement obligation, the estimated cost of dealing with that asbestos would be recorded as an asset with a corresponding liability or asset retirement obligation. So the village did engage a third-party engineering firm, Maquinna, to review its assets and identify its asset retirement obligations. In addition to 8 buildings identified with asbestos, it was also identified that the seaplane and municipal wharf, as well as a well site, will require future remediation by law. So Maquinna estimated that the total cost of remediating all of those assets in the future is just a little over $1 million. And this represents the initial value of the asset retirement obligation asset and liability. And those amounts that amount is recognized as such in the financial statements. As noted, some of the more significant obligations relate to the municipal and seaplane wharves, which are estimated to cost $195,000 and $145,000 to decommission each. And then when it comes to buildings that are owned by the village, the total future cost of remediating those assets is around $645,000. So as part of the audit, we reviewed the report that Maquinna provided and ensured that the assets listed on it were in line with the capital asset listing that we had for the village. We discussed it with management to ensure that it was complete and that it was in line with their expectations as well, and gain an understanding of whether there's any immediate plans to remediate those assets or not. At this point in time, there isn't any known plan to remediate any of those assets as far as we know at this point. So we did calculate the amortization of the asset retirement obligation at the end of the fiscal year based on the estimated remaining useful life on all of those assets. And we also note that there has not been discounting to present value on the asset retirement obligation. It is an option to discount the liability to present value, but in this case, the village, as I mentioned, doesn't have any immediate plans for remediating any of its assets. And so discounting it to present value adds an element of uncertainty, estimation uncertainty to that estimate. And so it's not been done. And this is in line with industry standard at this point and discussions with other municipalities and municipalities that we work with as well. Significant qualitative aspects of accounting practices. So every year we do look at the village's accounting practices and policies and ensure that the accounting policies are still appropriate for the village. There was no significant change in any of the accounting policies this year, with the exception of the adoption of PSAS 3280, which I just described. And all of the accounting policies are described in Note 1 of the financial statements. And for audit purposes, there's two types of misstatements that can be identified. There's both uncorrected misstatements and corrected misstatements. Corrected misstatements are those that we actually make in the financial statements. They get corrected and have an impact on the financial statements, whereas uncorrected misstatements are those that we can agree to disagree on and we have not made them in the financial statements. We do report all of our uncorrected misstatements in our audit findings report, and it is included as an appendix to this report, and they have been reviewed with management. They're all below our audit materiality of $48,000. Every year, we also review the internal controls and processes that the village has in place. Part of the audit is ensuring that the internal controls that the village has are appropriate and would identify errors before they happen. This year, we did identify some internal control deficiencies. Those are included in our management letter and included as an appendix to this report as well. I have reviewed them, or we have reviewed them with management, and we've discussed them all. So I won't go into detail into them today unless you would like me to, or unless there's any specific questions with respect to them. So that takes me to the end of the audit findings report. And with that, I'll jump into the financial statements.
Could I ask a question before we
Yeah.
get into financial statements?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and it's actually not necessarily to you, it's to our staff internally. I know we have been discussing, so to the CAO or to Deputy Finance Officer Alana, Janice. I'm wondering if any of these, if there are new mechanisms that would be put in place with better software that would mitigate any of these kind of control deficiencies or the internal control. Is that something that would be fixed by that, or is this something that just because of our size and only having two of us is something that we always go through every year? Do you know the answer to that?
I suspect that we will go through it at some degree every year, but getting the new finance software will definitely help mitigate some of those, those deficiencies, as well as training that the deputy finance officer is getting through our finance manager. We just continue to grow. And, yeah, we shoot for zero, but
Absolutely, and I know there are some things, so, and so then, having staff said that to the auditors, do you think that there are things within other, software systems, the same kind of question, are there things within other software systems that can help that out?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I do think that the switch to the new accounting system will be helpful for the village. As you said, it is a very small staff, and we definitely consider that in reviewing the internal processes. And we understand that it's not always possible to follow best practice when there's very few individuals working in the accounting data. But with that said, there's a few that I think the village will benefit from the new accounting system. And that additional training that's planned with the new accounting system, I think will be very, very beneficial for a few of them.
Perfect, thank you. Just kind of trying to look to mitigate these because I know with them every single year, and with only 2 people checking and back checking it, or 3 now, but that would be my hope with that new system. So thank you for answering to both to staff and to our auditors.
Yeah, absolutely. Were there any other questions, or am I good to continue on the financial statements?
Any other from council? Doesn't look like anybody's. Nope.
Okay, I'll continue on with the financial statements here. So just to start out, the first report within our financial statements is the management report. You see this every year, and you'll see it in all municipalities' financial statements. It is just a description of the responsibilities of management and the fact that these financial statements are ultimately management's responsibility. My apologies, here we go. Next report we have is our independent auditors report. We are expressing an unqualified audit opinion, or in other terms, a clean audit opinion, which means that, in our opinion, the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects, in accordance with the public sector accounting standards. There's no significant changes to our other auditors report, consistent with prior years. The first statement here is the statement of financial position, where the assets and liabilities and financial assets of the village are presented at the end of December. So you'll note that the village had cash of around close to $1.6 million. That was a little bit up from last year. There was around $800,000 transferred to temporary investments. So there was several GICs that were purchased, which is why you'll see the temporary investments number jumped up to 1.77 million this year from around 900,000 last year. So I'll just jump down to note 3, where the, oops, sorry about that, clicking buttons. The temporary investments are described. So you can see that around 976,000 of the investments are held in the MFABC money market account. So this is a high interest savings account, which had interest at around 4.94% in 2023, which was up from 1.92% in 2022. So a great thing for the village, and interest being earned on those funds. And then there was additional guaranteed investment certificates purchased this year for 800,000, and those bear interest at 4.3% and 4.5%, and they both mature in December of 2024. In terms of other significant differences on the asset and liability side, You'll note that unearned revenue jumped up this year to 548,000 from 451,000. So unearned revenue are amounts that the village has received primarily in grant funding that is being set aside for future expenditures and hasn't been spent yet. So note 5 here lists all of the grants that have been received in advance. The most significant one is the flood mitigation planning, and this was received in a previous year with 375,000. And part of it has been spent this year. 28,000 was spent this year on the slope hazard mitigation. And then you'll note a few other, a few other grants that were received this year. The next most significant one being the staff capacity and retention program for 92,000, and this related to the hiring of assistants in the finance department. The total amount received there was 100,000, with just 7,782 spent in 2023. And this note does describe each of the different grants that were received and are available for expenditures in 2024. I won't go into the details of every single one, but happy to answer any specific questions if there are any.
It's actually really good to note that that was a government grant that was given from the province in order to enable to help us to beef up, you know, staffing opportunities. And the first thing we used it on was financial help, because trying to mitigate some of these things. So this is what brings all of these changes about, which leads to better software and a better systems management. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely, for sure. It's a very helpful grant. So the next item under liabilities is that asset retirement obligations that I previously described for $1 million. So that amount includes the estimated cost of remediating the buildings, decommissioning the wharves, and decommissioning the wells. And then finally, tangible capital assets is one of the largest items on your statement of financial position for $6.5 million. This is all of the property and equipment that the village owns. I'll just jump down to note 7, as it also includes the addition of the asset retirement obligations. And so you can see the breakdown here in note 7 of the cost and amortization of all the village's categories of assets. So you'll note additions to equipment, roads and bridges, parks and land, and sewer, and then the addition of the asset retirement obligations totaling $1 million, which increased the cost this year and was the biggest reason for the increase in the overall tangible capital assets balance this year. So on the next page, I have the statement of operations where the revenues and expenditures of the village are reported, along with comparatives to 2022 and to the budget. So under revenues, you'll note total revenue for the year was $1.59 million, with increase to taxation. The largest increase in revenue this year was to government grants and transfers. The total value was 1.09 million compared to 588,000 last year. Government grants and transfers are described in Schedule 1, so I'll just, sorry for all the jumping around, but makes the most sense to show you as we go through. So this schedule shows all of the different categories of grants that the village received in the year. And as I mentioned, there was a jump this year. The biggest reason for that was the Growing Communities Fund grant, which was 553,000. And then the second largest grant that the village receives is the Small Communities Grant. And this year it was 377,000, a bit of a decrease from last year for 487,000. And then there were some smaller new grants that the village did receive this year. And so back to the statement of operations. Interest income was 54,000 this year, up from 25,000. primary reason for that was the increases in interest rates, as well as the movement of funds into the guaranteed investment certificates in the year. Finally, total expenditures this year was just a little bit over $1 million. And then the annual surplus for the year was $560,000. The statement of cash flows shows how the cash position of the village changed throughout the year, with the non-operating items listed below here. So overall, the cash increased from operating activities by $988,000, both because of the annual surplus and then adjusting for amortization, which is non-cash. This year, there was $72,000 in capital addition purchases, which reduces cash, and then the transfer of funds to the temporary investments for a net increase of cash of $68,000 this year. For the notes to the financial statements, as I noted in our audit findings report, Note 1 describes the accounting policies. No significant changes here beyond the new accounting policy for the asset retirement obligations, which describes the village's process for recognizing a tangible capital asset. There's also a new Note 2 here, which notes that the asset retirement obligations standard was implemented this year, and the fact that the village used the prospective application method, which means that the village implemented the standard on a go-forward basis. There was an option in the standard to recognize the asset retirement obligations in the previous year. It's a more complicated way to do it and doesn't really add a lot of value. So it's been done using the go-forward method, which is more simple. Touched on temporary investments. In terms of accounts receivable, this breakdown in Note 4 shows the total accounts receivable of $88,000 and what it consists of. So relatively consistent in terms of taxes and government remittances receivable. Grants receivable decreased a little bit this year, primarily just based on timing. And that was the primary reason for the overall decrease in accounts receivable this year. Touched on the asset retirement obligations and tangible capital assets. Note 8 describes the accumulated surplus of the village, and this is where the reserve funds of the village are broken out. So the statutory reserves and internally restricted reserves are noted at the top. Statutory reserves have a total of $107,000 allocated. These are 3 new reserves that were set out by bylaw this year. Capital Works, Machinery and Equipment, Fire Equipment, and Public Works reserves. So these reserves did exist in the previous year, but they were a new council bylaw was determined that these reserves are statutory. And then there's also internally restricted reserves, which do not have a bylaw designating them to be statutory reserves. The new largest internally restricted reserve is the Growing Communities Fund, which had $532,000 remaining in it. And I will go through what the transactions were within that reserve account. And then there was also a new Climate Actions Fund reserve account for $26,000 set aside. So just jumping to, there's also a schedule for reserve funds showing the transfers in, the expenditures, and then interest earned on those reserve funds. So the Growing Communities Fund had the addition of the $553,000 grant received and $20,000 in expenditures. The Climate Action Fund had $40,000 in grants received and $13,000 spent. And then gas tax, $65,000 was received this year and $2,000 spent. I will just note while we're on the topic of reserves, the Growing Communities Fund should be designated as a statutory reserve, and we have discussed with management that the province, as part of the funding agreement, the province does require the reserve to be a statutory reserve. And so that's something that we urge council to consider to ensure that there's no issues with the province and the funding there. And on the topic of the Growing Communities Fund, there's also a new Schedule 6 within these financial statements that's also required by the Growing Communities Agreement to outline the funds received and where that money has been spent. So as noted, 553,000 received, and so far costs have been allocated to museum siding, the Lot 501 feasibility study, the purchase of the Pandora culvert, and overflow parking expenditures for a total of $20,697 spent of that funding.
Could I ask a question here?
Absolutely, yep.
And it is more to staff then, so will we, once we, if we do the, financial statements as they stand this year, will it suffice to make a statutory reserve after that, or are we doing that as part of this budget?
No, it'll suffice. We'll make an amendment to bylaw to our statutory reserve.
Perfect, thank you, so we'll do that at a future meeting, so that, yeah, it just amends it, perfect, thank you. I knew you were on it, but I just was wondering, if that had to be done this meeting or it was something that we could do next, so thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. And no significant other changes to the remaining notes. I've touched on Schedule 1 with the government grants and transfers. Schedules 2 and 3 break out revenues and expenses by segment of the village. This is consistent with previous years as well, and no significant changes here to report. Touched on the reserve fund transactions. And finally, Schedule 5. This is similar to the previous schedule that I showed you for the Growing Communities Fund. This was the COVID-19 Safe Restart Grant that was received in 2020. So 200,000 was received that year and was allowed to carry forward. This is the first year that the village has spent out of that fund. Eligible costs included the digital and internet connectivity upgrades for 48,000, and then some infrastructure planning and office furniture purchased out of that fund. So there's 137,000 remaining from the COVID Safe Restart Grant. And that takes me to the end of the financial statements. I'm happy to answer any other questions if anyone has any.
Any other council have any remarks or questions to make?
Nope.
I'm not seeing anyone waving their hands crazily in the air, so I really like to thank both of you for coming this evening and presenting to us, and also for taking the time coming to our village and working with our staff here in this office, which makes it much more attainable for that office for some other work to be done during that busy audit week. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us tonight.
Great. Have a
Thank you.
lovely thing.
You too. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Councillor Deck might have a motion.
I do have a motion, a resolution statement here. Number 1, that the audit findings report and 2023 financial statements be accepted as presented.
Second.
Thank you.
Who was that?
Councillor Janice.
Okay.
Councillor Deck, Councillor Janice. Questions or comments by anyone? I don't think that's anything that we haven't heard before in that audited statements, except for the new legislative requirements.
Yeah, you understand.
Okay. Perfect. I will call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is carried.
Number 2 resolution. That the CAO sign off on the presented management report.
Second.
Councillor Deck and Councillor Lewis, thank you. Any questions or comments about that? Seeing none, like that, like I said before, that's nothing new that we haven't done year after year, so housekeeping. Thank you so much. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that's carried. All right. And thank you for getting those ready because they weren't contained in the report, but we do need to accept them at this meeting when they make the presentation to us. Perfect. Business arising from minutes. Consideration of a correspondence call with me. There is a report here about that. Did you want to, was there anything further that you wanted to say on that, CAO Nelson Smith?
Yeah, a little bit if I can. So even though council knows I am very pro policy and I am pro this policy, given 2024's workload with the new legislative requirements, I do have some concerns if we start putting a lot of correspondence on our agendas. As it does create an extra level of work for staff if we're to put it on our public agendas. I've outlined some of that stuff on the in the report. Without us able to get a part-time receptionist, the correspondence work is falling to either the deputy corporate officer, Alana Janice, or myself to put together. And if we put it in policy to have it on agendas, that is going to ultimately force us to drop some of the other work that we're doing to ensure that's done, because now it's in policy that it needs to be on the agendas. So those are my concerns. I'm absolutely all for a policy that helps us with the correspondence, because I'm just pro policy, period.
We never noticed.
And it's really helpful for us to maintain how we do it through different iterations of staff as time goes past.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I actually asked for this policy to be written up, or for a policy to be written up. I'm finding that I'll only speak for myself, but I have seen some other struggles with other counselors. I struggle with, so there's actually an item on here that is a piece of correspondence from March that completely flew under my radar that I didn't even see. And so it's good to have other people to pick up the pieces when maybe there are things that are given to someone in a portfolio that just might have been missed. I know that we have struggled in the past with things like emails with this council. It's hard to keep them all straight. And I'm just trying to find a way so there's a multiple eyes on these pieces so that we can bring them forward in a more timely fashion. Things that do concern like the public safety of the village, like the public paid telephones being gone from the village and things like that, right? So I find myself struggling and I needed to find a way. I know that we had done it a certain way with our past CAOs and for as long as I could remember. And I do know that there were issues with that. But also I'd like to find a happy medium where there's multiple eyes on on these pieces of paper so that it's not slipping through the cracks. So that's why I brought this forward. It's just open here for a conversation. I really do like the one from Seashells, but I think we should include anything that's sent to me as my portfolio per se would be sent to the rest of council as well. That's all I need is just more eyes on. I know that maybe means that I'm not doing my job very well, but I know we have had missed emails. There have been email issues with all of us. And so I'm taking responsibility for that, for my own part in that. So open for discussion. How do we feel? My expectation would not be that there would be a full correspondence list of every piece of paper that comes through this office. That's not what I'm saying. But the pieces that are given out to us as per our portfolios, instead of just being put in our box, would be put on a list. Some for information, some for action, like it says in the seashells policy. That was kind of what I was looking for. So discussion. Councillor Deck.
What type of correspondence are you concerned it will slip through the cracks?
I give an example about the one about the removal of payphones. That's that is a subject that I think that we should be discussing because it's a safety issue for the village. And I know there was previous work done on it from previous CAOs, but it had just things like this fall off the table. I hadn't noticed it. The reason it's on this agenda is because I sent CAO Nelson Smith an email that said, I see Stayward is doing something about their payphones being taken out. It wasn't because I saw this correspondence. Right? So I had missed it. If it can happen once, it can happen again.
Okay, so safety. That's an important part not to miss. What other types are we supposedly at risk of missing?
I don't know because I don't see all the correspondence.
Yeah.
So I don't see what goes to about tourism. I don't see what goes to health, to Barb. I don't see, and nobody sees what comes to me either. We've got this kind of vacuum, you know.
We do provide the list and have done for several months in the council correspondence cubby, which would include anything gone to you, anything gone to Councillor Deck, etc. So that was one of the things I put place, not in policy, just as, you know, a better way for, because you had mentioned that you wanted to be able to see everybody. So we have started doing that.
So again, is there a happy medium here? Somehow we can separate what we feel are important correspondence and maybe put those on the agenda, but limit it.
Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of what I wanted the discussion to be here is I don't want to see that entire correspondence list on the, that's a lot of stuff and a lot of it doesn't even mean anything to us. It's for information.
Yeah.
But some things that are for information are given to us each in our portfolios. Some of them that's given for action is given to us in our portfolios. So, and it's up to us to bring those things forward. And I don't know if we are or we're not. So I don't want to encumber staff by any means, but I do, there's got to be some kind of compromise. And that's why I liked this seashell one, because it kind of, it gives guidance. There may be things missed anyways, but at least it gives us a little better of a public accountability for it. I know that the correspondence list is available to the public as well, but it's not on any agenda or anything like that. So I'm looking for a happy medium.
Suggestion?
I quite like the seashell one myself.
Well, so do I then.
I think I see Councillor Lewis. Do you have your hand up?
I do.
Hey.
I'm just curious, for our CAO to weigh in, what do you see as the best way to deal with this without overextending or taking up too much time?
Through the mayor to Councillor Lewis, having a policy in place that does give staff direction on what correspondence is put on an agenda is definitely helpful, but also council support in reviewing the correspondence that is received. Not all of it is publicly available. Some of it is confidential correspondence. So that's something that as staff, we really appreciate council looking through. If there is a piece that they think is an action item. If it's a single piece, that gives staff the availability to check to see if it's publicly available. Whereas if we're doing a complete list, we have to double check everything. So some onus on council, if I may.
So what changes would you like to see to the way the policy is written right now?
Not a lot. Items marked for information are typically, I don't think relevant. If council has seen them in their portfolio boxes, then hopefully if they want to action them, they'll bring them forward for an agenda. So that would be, probably the key change that I would make.
I wonder what's different then from what it is now, because that's the same thing as it is now. Essentially, we say, hey, we've received this piece of correspondence. It's due to our portfolio. Can you put it on the agenda? I don't see if there's anything that I'm interested in, health portfolio. Do you know what I mean? There's these gaps, and I don't think we're, yeah. Same thing as the payphones, or me being sent something from UBCM on a ORV group that we actually should probably be participating on. And those, like, there are things that I'm not seeing until someone brings it to here. Whereas just because we have these portfolios doesn't mean that's our only viewpoint. So my mayor portfolio, I might be interested in a health topic, or Ron might be interested in a tourism topic. Like, I understand the portfolios and their use, but I also think that there are things that I'm not seeing, that people aren't seeing from me as well, and that are slipping through. Did you want to answer that or no?
I can, thank you, Mayor Colburn.
And then I'll get to my councillor.
Other changes we could make to the policy, this is something that we've used in other municipalities I worked in, is that list is available to council. We do have it digitally. With my week in review, I could also send out that list to council.
Hey, Councillor Jack.
So can we copy which one? Seashell?
This is what we do. We rob and duplicate. Don't redo something that's already been done by someone else. Absolutely. If it's there and available and it would work for us.
Yeah.
100%.
Is apparently, as long as we don't take anything from the sale, we're gonna be okay.
So then so as part of the recommendation that staff has given is that staff prepare a council correspondence policy for council review based on the District of Seychelles approved policy. So that's the recommendation in there. I'll wait till the discussion is over though before we.
So you don't need to move.
No, I mean, you could make the motion, but could I get Councillor Lewis's comment first? Councillor Lewis, you had your hand up again?
Yeah. So, Pete, through the mayor to CAO, just a question, you said everything is available digitally. So we would be able to get the list of correspondence, and the information in the correspondence, with that you could forward with your weekly report. So we would all get it then?
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Lewis. Definitely the list, it would, for every piece of correspondence we get, it would be onerous to scan that into a digital file. So we could send those as requested.
Okay, thank you.
But the list itself would appear, so the titles, so it'd be essentially the way we used to do business before. The correspondence list would be included in the agenda, And then we would just pick out pieces that interested us, or if we saw a title that we were like, oh, what is that? Then we could come over and look at it or request it be sent to us.
Correct.
Okay,
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
anybody else have any questions or comments before? Councillor Deck, did you want to?
I move that we steal seashells.
It's,
I move that staff prepare council correspondence policy for council review based on the District of Seychelles approved correspondence policy. May I have a seconder? Anyone?
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you to Councillor Deck and Councillor Adrian to move the recommendation as in the report. Do you want an addition to that to give us a digital correspondence list? And I actually don't think that it needs to happen every week. You give us it every week. I think, would it just be, do you want it in a resolution, like a subsequent, or would you prefer it as just direction to staff that bi-monthly?
Thank you, Mayor. I think, I think the best way to proceed is, we'll take that as direction from council now, but to include a line like that in the policy.
Okay. Okay, so so just the recommendation as is and include something like that, but councillors will be given a correspondence list every 2 weeks that they're in their emails to look at and see if there's something that jumps out at them.
Correct.
Amazing.
Could it be like, so that if there is something of interest, and I know you guys need time to do the agenda for our regular council meeting, so is like 2 weeks before a good timing or thereabouts, or a week and a half before, or?
Thank you to Councillor Lewis, to the mayor. Yeah, absolutely. Policies that I worked with in the past, we did have a cutoff date for correspondence, and it was typically the Monday prior to the agenda being created.
So then if you gave it to us the Friday before that, right, then we could, I would trust that you would time them as you need them and maybe put a reminder on that correspondence list. If there's anything you see, I need to know about it by Monday, to add that to the agenda for this week.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Councillor
Perfect.
Lewis. That's a great idea. All right, so the motion on the table is the recommendation that is in the staff report, prepare council correspondence policy for council to review based on seashells. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Correspondence. Removal of payphones dated March 5th. Did you, I know that I asked this to be put on here. Did you want to speak to it at all?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I don't have any history.
Okay, and so the reason I actually asked for this to be put on here was because I remember with the past CAO, there was there were some letters written to tell us if, and this is going back to, sorry to Councillor Deck and Councillor O'Connor, but Councillor Janice, Councillor Lewis, I ask for your memories here. There were letters written to tell us, asking them not to take our payphones out of here. And then there was this solution that they had given us to put in a business connect solution. And I think that's where it was left off. Is that everyone else's remembrance as well, or am I missing something?
I remember the discussion about it, but I think, wasn't that Business Connect, was that not highly expensive?
I'm not, it kind of fell off the table, which is why I'm wondering if we could ask our CAO to maybe do a little bit of investigation about what that would cost. I'm reluctant to have a village that is, you know, 45 minutes off the highway, that sometimes there's no power. It's a safety issue for me, and I think that we need to have these payphones or something similar to, for the safety of people. And if I'm way off base, then please, council, let me know.
I mean, if they just had one payphone in town, okay, but we, with no cell service, it's a vital link.
Mhm. That was my opinion as well, and so I was wondering, I was wondering if the CAO wanted to comment on what he had the capacity to maybe even do, just to maybe look back on the history, or there should be emails. Councillor O'Connor, I see your hand up maybe?
I have a feeling that that thing hasn't worked in a long, long time. I think we've tried it a couple times. I don't know if anybody else recall. I don't believe it's even worked in a while. I think we've tried a couple times, if my memory serves me right, because we're right there, so.
Which one? Oh, the one down by you, by the
The
airplane
one
dock.
that, yeah, sorry, is there another one?
Yeah, there's
There
one
was
by the
three.
store as well,
Sorry, whereabouts?
by the store.
Okay, copy, so maybe
And
it's just
also by the dock.
maybe it's the one down at the dock there that doesn't work then, okay.
But there is one near the other dock as well.
There's
Or there
three
was.
in town.
Shows how much I pay attention.
Well, we don't need them because we have internet and landlines. But a person who didn't, maybe CAO Nelson Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Colborne. If I could offer a suggestion, there is a TELUS representative for government relations. Staff could reach out to him. It's just simply an email away, reminding them that we don't have the connectivity that other areas have, and see what solutions they may come up with, and then we can respond back to council.
Could you forward this letter to them as well and say this is what we've received and what has prompted that from council?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that, oh, Councillor Janice.
Hi there. Maybe we could replace him with something, similar to a college campus. A phone like an emergency 911 phone.
Perfect, thank you for that. Yeah, if we're, depending on how they get back to us and what they say, if it's simply an email to get in touch, then I would ask that maybe the CAO do that and say, is something like that a solution, right? Like what do they come back with? And then CAO Nelson Smith can come back to us and say, we've got no options, one options, zero, two options, right?
Yeah, because I think the problem is that the phones aren't getting any use. So if you're running a business and what you're providing is useless and it's costing you money, you're going to want to get rid of it. So maybe we need to look at another option like that, where we have an emergency phone that is direct to 911 and doesn't cost a business anything. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that they had given that as one of the options. I seem to remember, and also in this letter, that they do have other solutions they suggest. I know the maintenance to just come out and check on those phones and clean the quarters out of them is prohibitive, right? They, like you say, they're not making any money. So thank you for that. Okay, so that's just, do you want that in a resolution, or is that just please send an email to tell us and these guys and say we're looking for solutions or options.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. Fantastic. And yes, all the things. We're far, we're rural, remote, we're an hour and a half from a hospital or our CMP station.
Even for tourists, you know, if somebody's car breaks down, they've got to phone a family member, you know, with no cell service or anything, it could be, yeah, very problematic. Like I said, we don't need 3 of them, as long as one was functioning.
Yep, one or something similar for sure.
Yeah,
And I know
yeah.
there is all these, the old default. I have had people knock on my door, not that I answered it. The neighbor actually said that someone was knocking on my door and needed to call someone. So, yeah, I didn't hear the front door, so. Okay, thank you for that discussion, council. Appreciate it. Where are we at? We are on bylaw. We have a staff report on the 5-year financial plan. Was there anything you wanted to add to this, CAO Nelson Smith?
No, thank you.
No? All right. So, recommendation is adoption. If anybody wanted to do that. Oh, did anybody have any questions or comments? Before we follow through with adoption of all of these? No? Okay. Take it away, folks.
We can do
I'm gonna move that council adopt bylaw 549/2024, Village of Zeballos 5-year financial plan bylaw 2024 to 2028.
Second.
That was Janice and Lewis. Thank you. Questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We'll go through to the annual tax rate.
I move we receive bylaw 550-2024 annual tax rate final reading. Bylaw 550-2024 annual tax rate.
So that's
Second.
final, that's adoption. Thank you, Councillor Lewis again. So that was Deck and Lewis. Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And then the adoption of the last one.
Move we adopt bylaw 551-2024 revenue anticipation bylaw.
For what? Wait a second.
Second.
Councillor Lewis, thank you for that. So that was Deck and Lewis. Questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. I had no new business on this agenda, so we are up to public question and comment period. Any questions from the gallery?
Thank you so much. Just looking through the material, the audit, very concise and appreciating that. Concern for the material weakness as defined above the matter presented in Appendix A. This is on page 21. And then the recommendation that went with it is to review by initialing the reconciliation and providing alternative documentary evidence for the review and approval. Is this happening?
I'm going to defer to staff on this, but recommendations that are brought forward by the audit are usually followed through on and built on every single year. So like I said, with the new software and all of those,
Yes.
we're always trying to do better and make sure that any kind of liabilities are mitigated. Would you say that? Okay.
Thank you. And what we do require in the number 4, the village immediately establishing a statutory reserve fund. Like we as villagers trust that the necessary steps are being done for the concern of all of us, sure. And my other question is regarding, what was this? It's on page 61. Our appeal. I would like to agree with the mayor that the general public have a right to all the correspondence and agendas of upcoming and ongoing information. Open communication saves any presumptions and assumptions. So what's important versus unimportant can be a personal judgment that is not inclusive to all. So understandably, the confidential information and correspondence, that's a different issue. But I appreciate every time I get my agenda ahead of time to go through it so that, like you said, people like, why we're not gonna really, like, come on. And if I had no knowledge till I came to the meeting, I'd have no say. So I appreciate everything that comes. So that says something for the community as well.
Look forward to that at a future date. We'll review it and see where it goes from there, what council has to say then. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. You know what that means, guys? There is no
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
That was Lewis and Janice. Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Right?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Thank you for taking time out of your work, Councillor Janice, to join us here. We appreciate that. Your commitment's great.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks. Welcome back, Councillor O'Connor.
Thanks,
Nice
guys.
to see ya.
Great evening. We'll see you soon.
See you.